system. Joining us now, former United States Army Green Beret John Frankman and retired Pinell County Sheriff Mark Lamb. I'll start with you, Sheriff Lamb. What did you make of President Sheinbaum's rejection of President Trump's offer to send troops to fight the cartels in Mexico?
Well, Matt, I'm not surprised. Look, anytime you bring out an offer like this the first time, I expected a little bit of pushback. She's got to do that on behalf of her people. But I don't know that she really has a choice, Matt. If she's going to get on top of these cartels, which have had deep roots in Mexico, a lot of corruption in Mexico, and it spills over into our country, she's going to have some help. And that help is in the way of the American military.
Well, that presupposes that she actually wants the help and wants to defeat the cartels, which I'm not entirely sure of. John, you were right there serving in the 7th Special Forces Group in the United States Army. Latin America was your area of responsibility. You know the tactics of these cartels. How would U.S. military presence in Mexico degrade the capabilities of these cartels if given the chance?
Right. So you wouldn't want to go in just full frontal force, having a large infantry brigade kind of storming across the border. What Special Forces does is we focus on foreign and internal defense. We focus on counterinsurgency. So often we are training other militaries. The exercise in February, that was probably a joint combined exercise training, which is something that a lot of Special Forces do. So we would train with their special operations. We would assist them in the targeting. And we'd probably train, advise, and assist. It wouldn't necessarily have to be U.S. Special Forces boots on the ground going onto the target, actually shooting the cartels, but we could help them in figuring out what is the network, who are we supposed to target, how are they working their logistics, and then providing some kind of military aid to them.
And again, that presupposes that their military is even on our side. The equivalent of their former Secretary of Defense was indicted in the United States for drug trafficking. I'll start with you, John, but I'm going to ask Sheriff the same question. Do you think we can trust the Mexican military to be a partner against the cartels?
That's definitely an assumption. That's something that we would have to figure out because we don't know. The cartels have infiltrated Mexican government to such an extent. And really, they are kind of controlling the state on so many different levels. They've infiltrated different military, government. I'm sure that President Sheinbaum is shying away from this aid because of how that could actually impact her, presidency. So I'm not sure exactly what the Mexican military wants to do. And that would be a very difficult thing, especially if we have American boots on the ground. How do we know who we can trust, who's going to inform about the future operations? So I think a more limited package could be something that we start with. And if we assume or can figure out that the president means well, she does want to actually eliminate these cartels, then we can talk about having a larger presence there.
What do you think, Sheriff? Can we trust them?
Well, Matt, you and I have both been in politics. It's hard to trust anybody out there. But I know for a fact that Jason Jones, a good friend of mine who works and does a lot of media stuff, he's really excellent on reporting. He spent time with those Mexican troops in Mexico. And he said, man, the work they're doing, Sheriff, is off the charts. They're out there. They're taking down these labs. They're fighting the cartels. So they are doing work. And I don't know that they get all the credit for it. But there is going to be a level of corruption that we're going to have to wade through. And it goes back to what you said. That's presupposing that this government in Mexico is even willing to do something like that.
Sheriff, you know what it's like to have to go and root out some of these cartel spotters from the hills and the mountains. You dealt with a lot of the drug payloads and human payloads coming through the county where you were the chief lawman. What does it mean in the fight against the cartels when they have operational freedom of movement in Mexico just across the border?
Oh, it makes this job almost impossible. We're trying to stop them here, but there's a plethora of people. If we take one down, they've got 10 more waiting to join the cartel, whether it's through the money they offer these people or whether it's through the plato o plomo. They can take the lead or the money. And a lot of them times they're forced into serving these cartels in a military capacity or in an enforcement capacity. And that makes it extremely difficult to guys like us who are trying to play by the rules, who are playing by a constitution, and these guys are not. So it's tough.
John, you talked about the way in which United States Special Forces could embed alongside Mexican forces. If that were to occur, do you think it has a high chance of success against these very sophisticated and capable cartels?
So I think that the way that we look at military power is it's not just the military. I mean, Trump is already doing the economic bargaining as well. So it needs to be a full frontal thing. And I think that even his offer might be just more diplomacy as well. But as far as the military's capacity to make a change, to affect change with special forces, it would be limited depending on the amount of presence that we can have there. It would have to be something where we train people who we can trust, we help them to elevate their capabilities, help them with the targeting, but it's not going to turn the whole Mexican government country around. We only have, however many battalions of people.
Yeah, when you look at where this fighting would have to occur, or where the rooting out would have to occur, it would largely be in the Sinaloa Mountains, a high terrain in some places, a jungle terrain in many places. How do you go about attacking an environment like that, John Frankman?
So if you know exactly where the cartels are, if we were willing to loan different drones and strikes of that nature, that would be something you could do. You could do a military freefall operation or do some kind of infiltration to catch them off guard. I'm not sure what their night vision capabilities are, but you could run operations in the evening. But you try to get them when they're at their least advantage. But the fight isn't just going off and killing the narcos. What you have to do is you have to really bring the population to see the government as being legitimate. And that's what this kind of foreign internal defense, this counterinsurgency is that this counter state has a lot more legitimacy than the Mexican government itself. So it's trying to win over the people. And one of the difficulties, if you have American troops on the ground, is as soon as they kill someone, as soon as we get blood on our hands, that can dissuade the Mexican people.
Sheriff, we have seen a number of exchanges where Mexican police train alongside different police forces in the United States. How should Americans think about the collaboration that exists or doesn't exist with border communities and border law enforcement, and then what's happening in Mexico? And is that an area where there could be enhanced cooperation, maybe in lieu of boots on the ground for our military?
Look, I don't have any problem with the cooperation. They are a good neighbor. We trade together. We live next door. We vacation in Mexico. They come here. But what we don't like, and I don't think their country likes it either, we don't like the human trafficking. We don't like the drug trafficking. And that comes from those cartels. So we've got to find that common ground. And I don't think it's a bad thing to have our law enforcement down training theirs. I don't think it's a bad thing to have our Green Berets and our special forces down training them in how they can combat these cartels a little bit better. And maybe even providing them some equipment that they may or may not have. The cartels are very well equipped. They have far more artillery than we do in local law enforcement. But yes, I'm okay with training together. I think Mexico is a good neighbor and a good partner, not the cartels.
So, John, the way in which this is being received in Mexico is a lot different than U.S. troop presence in some other countries. For example, in El Salvador, we've seen President Bukele say, hey, look, if the Hondurans don't want as big of a base there, we would welcome more of these Green Berets to come and help with that internal training that you discussed. But in Mexico, it seems as though there's a real reticence to that real boots on the ground, active combat mission activity. Why do you think it's so different in Mexico than you might see in other areas that were part of the AOR for 7th Group where you served?
Well, I think that with El Salvador, we have President Bukele, who's just an amazing leader, and he's really shown how having U.S. presence in the country has helped. I went to El Salvador at one point when I was at 7th Special Forces Group, and I know that we have been training their units. I think we have a much longer history with Mexico. We might not think about the Mexican-American War, but that's something that they think of. So as silly as it might seem to us that we might go there and take their land or occupy, it might be a concern of theirs. And it might just be such a culturally ingrained thing that they're hesitant about having the American people there.
I want to shift gears really quick because you're both experts on a couple other topics I want to discuss. John, we saw the confirmation hearing for Matthew Lohmeyer for a key position at the Department of Defense. He has been calling for accountability of the people who illegally pushed the experimental vaccine on our service members and caused the separation of thousands of people, including yourself. Just a quick reaction to his confirmation process, and where do you think that accountability effort currently stands?
I think Matt Lohmeyer is an amazing man, and we both met each other when we met President Trump during that Veterans Town Hall. And I think bringing in people like that shows that the Trump administration and Pete Hegseth is serious about accountability. The other day, which was very news-breaking and very hopeful for us, is that Hegseth himself said that the shot mandate was unlawful, something that you were one of the lone representatives in Congress saying as well. So seeing him say that it's unlawful, having him acknowledge that it's a work in progress, I think that we're going to see some progress. We're going to see some accountability, and hopefully it's not just firing individuals. Hopefully it's reduction of rank, changing their discharge statuses, things of that nature. But Matt Lohmeyer, amazing man. He'll do great things in the Defense Department.
And Sheriff Lamb, one final question for you. We saw this teacher in Maine make threats against President Trump and his cabinet. It is so troubling to see people get radicalized to the point of violence. How serious should law enforcement take these threats that bubble up against the president and his team?
Well, I think we should take them very serious, Matt. We had an attempt. We had multiple attempts, one very public attempt on the president's life, and by the grace of God, he wasn't killed. So I think that these threats should be taken very serious. 30, 40 years ago when we were growing up, you didn't dare make a threat against the president of the United States because you thought the FBI would kick your door down and take you into custody. Nowadays, it seems to be commonplace under the guise of the First Amendment. Look, the First Amendment gives you the right to say something, but it does not absolve you of the consequences if you break a law. And I think these people are in many cases breaking the law or encroaching on breaking the law. And that goes for, Section 8, 1324, harboring or concealing or shielding illegals from federal law enforcement as well.
I've got to leave it there. Sheriff Mark Lamb, John Frankman, thank you both for coming on and sharing your extensive expertise and perspective.
Thanks, brother. Good to see you.